This is part 2 of my two-part series on how to paint Ork Skin. And this is where we left off on part 1 with the airbrush work and the washes. And this is where we're headed in part 2, which is all brush work. Let's talk tools and colors. Using a size 0 Raphael 8408 series, and really the two essential colors for this whole process are a combo of the Snarsnick green and the Cadian flesh tone. You can see here on the palette I'm mixing up really my neutral skin color. This color ends up being the mid-tone for everything else that happens on the miniature. My highlight color is a mixture of the pallid witch flesh and that neutral color, and I'll mix more and more of the pallid witch flesh in periodically over time to lighten. But that neutral color gets mixed into all of the colors, the shadows, and color variations. So the first step in this process is working with that neutral color. I keep the paints thin, and I start applying a thin coat to the upper raised surfaces. You can see I'm starting with the arm here. I'm just trying to kind of enhance the highlight a little bit, and this is not going to be a dramatic step. Really, I'm kind of working up to the lighter colors that I'm going to use on the skin, but this is kind of a mid-tone neutral, and I'm not fully covering the work that I did with the airbrush. Really, it's thin enough that it's almost kind of like a glaze, and I'm really just working to pick out the kind of raised edges and pieces that would be most caught by light. I'll do this, across the face. It's important to focus on areas like the cheekbones, the ridges on the top lip, the eyebrows, and I'll even put a little bit on that lower lip because that lower lip's going to get tinted later on, so just lightening it up a little bit. Okay, so I jumped ahead a little here. After finishing that first layer, I'm using the Snarsnick green neutral color that I lightened with the pallid witch flesh to kind of do the next step in the sort of thin layering process. Again, focusing on the hard-edged areas of the face is really key to getting that kind of dramatic effect. I really like to try to draw the attention to the face on the orcs. I think it's really important to getting them to look good. You can actually see I'm adding little hatch marks on the head there, kind of gives a little bit of a texture. Focusing on the top of the ears, again, those exaggerated sort of hard edges is really where you want to kind of focus in. Again, touching on the lower lip, that's going to be lightened so that I can tint that with washes later in the process. As far as the arms go, I am not really laying on a solid coat. If you can see closely, I am actually hatching on very thin lines to kind of create the effect of the muscle streaks in the arms. It's a process that you got to be delicate and have a fine point on your brush. I don't want to lose the colors that I've kind of worked to lay down prior to this, and if you're too liberal with the highlight, you can just kind of wash it out and he'll start looking too light. So I like the texture that comes with kind of adding in the streaking. So I like to lay in some of the details on the face before I go too far on the highlighting. I'm gonna just attempt to, on camera, pop in the eyes on this little guy. I'm using the pallid witch flesh first to kind of paint the eyeball, and then I'm going to come back with the Evil Sun's Scarlet and color at least the good eye. He's got one bad eye that's going to be scarred and kind of damaged. His good eye is going to be the scarlet red. I'll pop a little highlight on that scarlet red. So there's no real trick to painting eyes. Having a good fine point on the brush and trying to find a stance where you can really kind of gently paint in the eye. You know, the nice part about doing it at this stage is if you do mess up badly, you can come back in with some of your other colors and kind of clean up around it. You can see I just kind of pop in that highlight there and it really punches it up a little. The eye's not perfect. It was really a struggle to paint the eyes while having the camera in front of me. So once I have the eyes roughed in, I come in just with some of my really thinned down black. I actually use a black ink. It's really thin, and thin it with some more water and even flow improver sometimes. It's almost like using an intense wash. But I just come in and kind of black out around the teeth. I'll come in later on and actually paint in the teeth, but this kind of just ups the contrast in the mouth. I try to not really paint the tongue and the gums because I'll kind of come in with the light pinks just after this stage to kind of pop those out. Speaking of gums and tongue, I use Screamer Pink and then highlight that Screamer Pink with some of the pallid witch flesh. Just do a quick base color on the tongue and the gums with the Screamer Pink. This is a great color, especially mixed with greens. When it's washed with different colors, it's really vibrant. It's really saturated. I like to use it on the orc mouths. It kind of provides some visual interest when they're, you know, screaming, or he's one of these guys with baring his teeth and stuff like that. Especially since I kind of tend to use the muted skin tones. When you can pop in colors that are really saturated, it gives a nice accent to the desaturated colors. So you can see I'm just doing kind of keeping it thin, pulling the paint, you know, to where I want it, but just thin little highlights on those areas. I'm actually going to come back in after this stage with a wash. If you feel like you went too far with the highlights, you can knock it back. Sometimes I will highlight brighter than I want it to be and then come back with the wash, kind of a glaze of a wash, and knock back that highlight a little bit. Okay, so the next step is actually one of my favorite steps. I use washes to tint some of the flesh colors. Not really using them as washes, kind of using them as more of thin glaze that kind of alters the color. So I'm starting here with the Carroburg Crimson shade, and you can see I just started tinting the lower lip, went over the gums, the tongue, and now in between the ridges of the upper lip, I like to add some of this wash. The crimson wash all over the green really sort of enhances the fleshy effect. I'm also using it here, you can see on the scar. I like to use it on areas that will be kind of flush with blood, you know, irritated skin, damaged skin. You know, it's good for the ears, the nose, and definitely the lower lip. But one word of advice, I'd avoid doing the upper lip fully with the crimson wash, because if you have the lower lip and the upper lip done that way, it tends to look a little lipsticky. You know, we're not putting makeup on the orcs here. I found, you know, the nice workaround is kind of working those ridges. And you can see I do a couple of layers of the crimson wash. It kind of deepens the color a little bit. You can let it dry a little bit and come back with it. I'll even put it in some random spots too, you know, just like kind of irritated spot, like especially if you have a character that has, you know, like a power weapon or something that attached to their arm, or some sort of machinery fused to them, which is great for orcs. You know, that flesh there where it meets the machinery is going to be kind of raw and irritated and nasty. So the crimson wash really kind of enhances that effect. So then I kind of grabbed my Antonian camo shade, which I used in the first stage, and that I'll pop into certain areas on the miniature when I just want to enhance the saturation of the green, especially in some of the shadow areas. Okay, in this next stage I'll really be working the lightest lights and kind of the darkest darks. You can see I just mixed up an even brighter highlight color, and then I have over there mixed up one of my new favorite kind of shadow colors. It's actually a combination of the wog flesh and the screamer pink. It creates this really nice greenish gray, which you can see I'm just kind of thinly working into some of the shadow areas. It gives this really nice color variation to some of the areas that you want to shadow. And again, this helps you just kind of clean things up, and if you want to sort of enhance the shadows in certain areas, it's a really interesting color to play with. You can add a little more screamer pink to knock it even towards the purple side. And then jump to the highest highlights. This is really where you focus in on the face, and this is where you're really going to get some of those details to pop, is coming in with some of those carefully placed highest highlights are really going to enhance those details. So you can see I really pulled out those ridges on the top lip, the hard ridge on the nose, and the eyebrows. Definitely going to go for the cheekbones. This is one of my favorite steps because it really enhances the face. And again, that I said before, if you can draw attention to the face, it's really going to bring some focal point to the miniature, and we as humans are kind of naturally drawn to faces, so I tend to put the highest highlights and some of the darkest darks to create that contrast on the face and try to really pull out those little details. This is a fun little detailing step. I tend to take that lightest highlight color and really carefully kind of hatch in some little ridges on the lower lip, and then I will come back with the crimson wash over that. But this kind of gives the lower lip this ribbed, cracked, chapped kind of look, which is perfect for the orcs. Here comes the wash, just to kind of knock back that highlight, but it gives a little texture. You don't want to be afraid to kind of paint in texture sometimes. It's fun to play with. I tend to like adding in some hatching, and there are some really talented painters out there that use various stippling effects that create that texture. We are nearing the finish line here on the face and the detailing, So I'm going to start with some Xandri dust and kind of flesh out the teeth. Again, just keeping the paint thin, controlling how you put it on there. This is just a first layer, kind of gives that yellowed quality to the teeth. I'll then mix in some pallid witch flesh and kind of do a first highlight on the teeth, and then come back in lastly with just a straight pallid witch flesh, picking out just like the tips to kind of that light pop. Again, you want to be careful doing this stage because you had already kind of blackened in the mouth and painted the tongue, but you can always come back with a little black if you need to carefully clean up something. Luckily this guy's teeth were not terrible to paint. There's a couple of orcs with mouths that are a real pain to get the teeth looking right. There's that highlight I was talking about, coming in and just popping out the teeth real quick. Again, if you can do some simple staged layered highlights, it'll really bring a piece together. And it doesn't take that much time. You know, you can see that things are sped up a little bit, but that little extra color, you'll see when coming one more time with the pallid witch flesh, really kind of knocks it up, kind of causes those teeth to pop a little bit. And now we're just doing some final detail work. Just use a little hash nut copper, pull out the earrings and the lip ring. I actually did a little bit of cleanup on the skin in a couple of areas. I didn't show, the video's getting a little long, but here you go. Pretty much the final approach I do for every one of my Ork Boys. You can see the face has a nice color transition. You got the streaking in the arms. The model really comes together when you do the rest of the details and add a little weathering. I'm gonna show you a couple other pieces that I use all these techniques on to give you a feel on the variety you can get with using this approach to Ork Skin. So, thanks for watching. As usual, feel free to comment or send me a message. Follow me over on Instagram on QuarterPaint. And if you guys have any video requests, send them my way.